Be here. Thank you so much, Stephen, for organizing this, and Jochen. Clearly significant action is required for us to achieve a transition to a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient future. And that is going to require both private and public capital. Public finance is just not enough. It plays a very important role, but it's going to take trillions, as we all know, to meet our net zero goals by 2050. And so we're going to have to overcome some of the barriers that exist today in terms of getting those financial flows going. In fact, the latest research actually shows that if you look at sustainable finance initiatives, they've quintupled in the last decade. So we certainly are seeing very good momentum, which is excellent. We've seen groups of financial institutions step up, dedicate significant capital in their portfolios to transition. In fact, a study in 2020 by the New Climate Institute found that financial institutions with cumulative assets of 47 trillion under management, 25% of the global financial market, are currently committed to climate-related targets. So these are the types of things we certainly want to see happening. I think following the pandemic, the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, COP26 as we know it, offers a really excellent opportunity for us to really start to mobilize in a significant way. And really start to think about not just climate, but the broader nature-related risks and the social-related factors that have become so apparent during this crisis. And there's no doubt financial centers are going to play a critical role in success here. We are the nodes for the expertise, the capital that needs to be delivered to find the solutions here. So, as I sit in this seat as the chair for World Association of International Financial Centers and co-chair with Lamia from Casablanca in FC4S, I think we have a very special opportunity to work together as financial centers to really mobilize action, expertise, and capital to meet our goals. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Stephen, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And I think, a key takeaway from what I just heard, there's 2 points. One is the crowding in of private capital. It doesn't matter what size you are as a government, America, China, even the EU, wherever it may be, you as a government do not have enough capital to finance this transition. So you need to have private capital supporting it. And it's not philanthropic private capital. It's capital based that, you're going to see returns. Again, a key topic of COP26 returns. The second one was, it's a broader environmental discussion. I think, Jennifer, when FC4S first started, was more focused on the climate agenda. Now one could argue it's broader, biodiversity, nature related, but also, as you mentioned, social. And that's something really in terms of the broader environmental, social and governance aspects as well. But before we get into our panel, I'm also delighted to be joined by Jochen, who's put me to shame by wearing a tie. But Jochen is in Frankfurt and is the Chief Executive of the World Alliance of International Financial Centres. Jochen, can I just hand over to you to maybe take a moment to brief us on WAIFC, please, sir?
With pleasure, Stephen, and thank you very much for mentioning our association, the World Alliance of International Financial Centres. Our chair, Jennifer, has perfectly summarized the issue and also our ambitions, which we share with FC4S in sustainable finance. Yeah, let me add a few comments on the World Alliance. We are a non-profit association registered in Belgium, comprising currently 24 leading international financial centers across 4 continents. Our members are government agencies, public-private partnerships, or similar institutions developing and promoting their financial centers. The World Alliance, we foster the collaboration between our members, not only for topics, for the topic of sustainable finance, but also for topics like fintech, financing of small and medium-sized enterprises, inclusive finance, and recently the economic recovery from the current pandemic. On our website, waifc.finance, you can find various publications on those topics. For instance, in our Sustainable Finance Report from December last year, we provided clear recommendation for financial centers on how to manage the transition. Sarah Abdel Rasoul, who is with us today, was a co-author of this report, and I'm sure she will give later more details in the discussion we will have. Regarding the World Alliance, please also consider maybe subscribing to our monthly newsletter so that we can keep you updated about our work and the most exciting events of our members. Yeah, today, as Stephen has mentioned, we are delighted to partner with FC4S in promoting sustainable finance among financial centers in the financial industry. We will jointly discuss what our joint membership brings to COP26 and what our members expect from the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow next month. In 2 weeks, we will also have our annual general meeting of the World Alliance, where we will discuss the future of finance and what trends will impact the financial industry. That said, something is already clear. Sustainable finance is a top priority and essential not only for the future of the financial industry. And financial centers will definitely do their part in managing the transition towards a more sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jochen. And there's some points that you just made there that I'd like to unpack a little bit. One, you mentioned fintech and digital, key opportunity in terms of enabling the sustainable finance agenda. But you also mentioned SMEs and the financing of SMEs. Around the world, most economies, national economies, consist of SMEs. And so how do we get these SMEs access to capital? How do we get them reporting? Going back to a key topic of COP, climate disclosure around reporting. And they're SMEs, and they don't have a lot of capacity right now on this topic. So we do really need to work with them to build their capacity. So thank you for that, Jochen. I suppose just before we get into our panel, let's just take a step back from FC4S analysis, and I'm grossly oversimplifying this, but when from our analysis, and all we do is focus on this topic of sustainable finance, we're seeing 6 to 7 key challenges or key topics popping up, and I'm stressing, I'm grossly oversimplifying this. One is around skills, and we will unpack this with our members, but skills or the lack of skills around sustainable finance. And Jennifer, maybe you can speak to Canadian experience on that later on and go around the table as well. Data. Without data, it's not consistent, it's incomparable, another big issue around this topic. Skills and data holding back product development in this space. So how are we going to mobilize further capital if we can't develop products and services at scale? The fourth one is conversions at a policy and a regulatory perspective. There's a lot going on in different jurisdictions. We may not see total conversions, but hence the reason why the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Groups work this year, of which FC4S is a knowledge partner, so important. The fifth one is too many initiatives per se for industry. I sometimes, you've heard me say this before, feel like an amateur therapist with major CEOs of banks, insurance going, oh my God, what's happening? I'm seeing a tsunami of green finance directives. My company's trying to report, we're trying to do this. And then that leads on to the next point, biodiversity. What's biodiversity mean and how do we actually capture that as a risk and an opportunity? And biodiversity and climate are the same, are two sides of the same coin. And then back all the way to what you said there at the beginning, fintech or digital, Jochen, an opportunity in terms of an enabling tool. So that's kind of the sort of stuff that we are seeing. So I'm going to get straight into the panel. I'm going to ask Selena, can you just give us a brief introduction from Kuala Lumpur, please?
Stephen. Hi, everyone. My name is Zelina. I head Capital Markets Malaysia, which is an affiliate of the Securities Commission, but I also double hat as the head of secretariat for the Malaysian Sustainable Finance Initiative, which is a member of FC4S. MSFI, in short, is a joint initiative between the private sector and the regulator to bring together intermediaries from both the financing side, the banking side, and the capital market side to look at product innovation in the space of sustainable finance. And we address 2 major things that Stephen just mentioned just now. We look at skills, building capacity in that space, and we also see how we can help our players with data. And so those are our 2 main priorities this year. I'm going to stop there, Stephen.
Thank you, Salina. Emmanuel in Lagos, can you just give us a brief introduction to FC4S Lagos, please, sir?
Thank you very much, Stephen, and good afternoon to everyone listening in. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be a part of this session. I'd like to say that we're very happy to be a part of it, and we look forward to future collaborations in this space. But just to speak about Lagos, FC4S Lagos is also a partnership between public and private sector agencies and institutions. So we have the policy and regulation thematic area, which has mainly the ministries, departments, and agencies of government as members. including the National Pension Commission, the Debt Management Office, the Securities and Exchange Commission, etc. We have the Research, Education, Engagement thematic area, which has a membership from the academia, from specialist institutions, and from the universities and business schools. And then we have the issuances and investment thematic area, which also has those who will be issuing green instruments, those who will be facilitating those issuances, and it has those who will be investing in those assets also. We have the legal and risk management thematic area, which is the area that looks at how to de-risk green investments so that they can be more bankable. And then, of course, we have our priorities focused on access to data and information on green and sustainable finance. We also have our focus on providing a pipeline of projects that can be scaled up to help us to build that new green economy we want to build in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Sarah, can I go to you in Stuttgart, please?
Of course. Maybe first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to today's discussion, to the next 45 minutes. And hello, everybody from Stuttgart. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Deputy Director of Stuttgart Financial, which is the financial center initiative for the city of Stuttgart, but also the state of Baden-Württemberg. And as some points were already mentioned, but as some other initiatives, we are trying to connect and support our financial centers on 4 main strategic topics, which are innovation, startups and fintechs, HR and financial literacy, and last but not least, sustainable finance, which we just started last year. And I think within that 1 year, we learned so many things, and we got to see and hear so many things from other initiatives that I'm very happy that I can share some of our experiences today. I think you're still on mute, Stephen.
A year and a half in, guys, I will get it right sometime. I was saying congratulations for a center that's only been focused on sustainable finance for just over a year. Congratulations on co-authoring the WAIFC report, which is really, really excellent. So congratulations on that. Jennifer, last but not least, as my boss, I'm going to come to you and ask you just about a little bit about Toronto, because you kind of gave a global vision there a few minutes ago, but maybe just on Toronto and your role within Toronto, please.
Thank you, Stephen. So I'm the CEO of Toronto Finance International. And so our organization is public-private partnership between the 3 levels of government and the financial services sector here in Canada. And our organization promotes the Canadian financial sector, the Toronto Financial Centre globally. And then domestically, we focus on issues which go to growth and competitiveness of the industry. So clearly, sustainable finance and the growth of sustainable finance in Canada and globally is a core objective, strategic objective for our organization, and one that we've been working very closely with the financial services sector on for many years now. And I will say, in terms of Toronto overall, the momentum here, I talked about momentum earlier generally around the globe on sustainable finance, and we certainly are seeing that here in Toronto and in Canada, which I'm delighted to see. More is needed, of course, but we are seeing the right momentum begin here in Canada as well. So we can talk more about that when we jump into the panel.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm actually going to start with you first now. So now I'm going to get into my questions, if I may, and I'll start with you first. So if we're looking at COP26, private finance hub priorities, as I said earlier, are climate disclosure and reporting, risk management, returns, and mobilization of capital. And as I outlined, those kind of 7 key challenges earlier on: skills, data, product, and so on and so forth. Where, and this is just a passion of mine, where is Canada on the skills agenda? Because all those things are great. If you don't have the capacity within organizations, and by the way, I don't mean just the private, because the private market, and Selena, I'll be asked you about this later on, but also policymakers and regulators. So where are you in terms of the skills agenda on sustainable finance in Canada, please, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece, and you and I, Stephen, have talked about this. It's great if we all decide we want to do something and drive capital towards great things and sustainable economic development and climate. But do we really have those skills and expertise to sort of know how do we deliver on some of these objectives? And I think we certainly, just like every other financial center, are running to get those skills and figure out how we're going to deliver the right training, the right academic programming to make sure we've got the skills to deliver. So I think it's an important piece that everybody needs to think about because, stating an objective is great, but how do you get the right people around the table to deliver on that? So we're doing some work here in Toronto with FC4S actually around assessing the skills that we have, the skills we need for the future, and how we're going to develop those. If there are gaps, who is going to deliver on that? Will it be the post-secondary institutions, the universities? Will it be organizations like Chartered Financial Analysts or our accounting associations? Will it be our Institute for Corporate Directors? So I think there's multiple players who will need to come together, and we're already seeing much programming being developed and delivered. But what we're trying to do as an organization with this work that we're doing is really get targeted so we can get the right training quickly to our financial services professionals so that we're ready to deliver on our climate goals and on our sustainable economic development goals.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. And it's not just everybody. You can actually, as you say, use the word targeted. So you could have 1,000 analysts, or you could have 100 portfolio managers that are combined managing X trillion. And if you get those 100 portfolio analysts on top of this agenda, the impact and the deployment of that capital could be far greater than 1,000, general staff in a retail type entity. Selena, if I can move on to you next, because you and I have talked about skills in the past, and you were good enough to invite me last year. It was last year, because the time was flying, to moderate a panel in Kuala Lumpur, which your minister was good enough to open on sustainable finance. And I kind of got introduced virtually to your community. And it was amazing that day. We were also running through that thread. It was around talent. And I'd be very interested where you are. I know you're exploring development of roadmap, but also talent, but within that TCFD, which again, the Task Force of Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is a big thing around COP. Please, Selena.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So you're right. I think as early as 2018, when we had a task force on how to mobilize, at that point it was green finance. One of the major challenges was skill sets, not only from the financial sector, we saw it across the whole value chain. We're talking about asset owners, asset managers, intermediaries, banking intermediaries, fund managers, and we're also talking about issuers. So because of that, we actually set up 3 centers of excellence. So MSFI is just one of them. And what we have been doing is we're recognizing how the Malaysian economy is structured. And so we've become quite, we've built the depth when it comes to fixed income. But we find that the Malaysian economy is predominantly 70% driven by SMEs or private companies, and they're looking for funding in new areas. So we're looking at things like, we've seen a lot of interest when it comes to fintech. So we have ECF and P2P players that have naturally started specializing in financing or funding sustainable projects. So we're finding that's a new area. And so we've got to build up that skill set among ECF and P2P players on how to evaluate a sustainable project, how to educate investors on how to invest that. We're also seeing a lot of interest in the private market space, especially in the VC space. We find that the VCs are starting to get a lot of requests for sustainable financing. So we're helping our VC players in that space. But going back to the traditional product range of fixed income, so we're now starting to explore transition. We're starting to work with our intermediaries on how to identify transition projects, how to help our corporates, Malaysian corporates, to transition to become more sustainable. What kind of projects should be funded through sustainable financing? So those are the kind of skill sets that we're looking for from an intermediary point of view. But interestingly, we have 2 other centers of excellence. So for the one for asset owners, most of our asset owners have quite a lot of depth when it comes to ESG standards, investment standards. We're now addressing stewardship. We're looking at how they engage and how they work with the investee companies to become more sustainable. So that's for the asset owners. And with regard to our corporates, we have a third center of excellence called Center for Sustainable Corporations. And for that one, we're addressing the data issue. So we're looking at TCFD, and we're saying that scope 3 disclosures, scope 3. So 70% of most of Malaysian PLCs, their carbon emissions comes from scope 3, but they are unable to quantify their supply chain carbon emissions. So what we're doing is we're working with the corporates, and we're also working with SMEs on how to identify, measure, and disclose their carbon emissions. So those are the kind of areas we're looking at to build up the skill set so the whole value chain moves along as we go.
And Selena, thank you for that. And I suppose it's very topical, TCFD, because later this week, the TCFD Secretariat will release updated guidelines for, I believe, 3,000 firms around the world who are looking at this space. And, you mentioned SMEs, you mentioned digital, again, key topics that Yaka mentioned earlier on in his opening remarks as well. I moderated a session this morning on agriculture, and, it would be, an understatement to say that there's a lot of cows in Ireland. It's one of the big things that Ireland does, and it exports 85% of its agricultural produce, which I never realized. And they themselves were mentioning scope 1 and scope 2, yes, but not there yet on scope 3. Yeah. And as you point out yourself, it's actually quite difficult, but it also goes back to data points, which is a key thing. Selena, just while I have you on the line, just in terms of biodiversity. So forgive me if I got an outdated view of Malaysia, but in terms of the economic mix and palm oil and different aspects like that, how or where is the biodiversity agenda within the sustainable finance agenda in Kuala Lumpur, please?
Stephen, surprisingly, we've actually set up the ministry who's in charge of biodiversity and forestry have actually set up a private sector-led biodiversity working group, which I'm a part of. And that includes your palm oil companies, it includes the oil and gas industry, and it includes stakeholders like WWF and of course us, the financial sector. And what we're trying to figure out is how do we protect the Malaysian biodiversity and yet let the economy run? And so what we're trying to address from a financing point of view is what are the opportunities, but besides the opportunities, how do we quantify biodiversity risk and include that in the financial sector? So when we are funding the real economy, we can take into account the risk of biodiversity. But it's a new area for us. I think the best thing about it is the fact that everyone's come to the table and we recognize it's an issue and we recognize that it's an important issue that needs to be addressed. So it's a good mix of both the government and the private sector trying to figure out how to deal with biodiversity.
Thank you, Selena. And I would argue actually from experience that what you're doing that round table is more than other jurisdictions are doing as well. So biodiversity is coming up fast along the inside lane. This time last year when FC4S had its AGM, members were a little bit, should we be looking at biodiversity? I think that's changed dramatically in the last 12 months. And again, I didn't realize that over 50% of the world's economy, according to the World Economic Forum, is linked back to nature-related activities. And so, we do need to get on top of this agenda. Emmanuel, if I can pop over to you in Lagos, please, sir. We did a piece of work with you earlier on this year, which was looking at some major banks and what percentage of their loan books were focused on green. And in discussing it with you, again, I'm staying with the skills agenda. Part of it was, and we also had a call with your financial ministry. Are we seeing skills as well within Lagos as kind of something that needs to be dealt with to move on to product development, product innovation, please, Emmanuel?
Thank you very much, Stephen. That's a very important question. I think from my own viewpoint, I think there's still much more work to be done in terms of the right kind of skills that we need to help to push the climate agenda in Nigeria. And I think this cuts across both the government and the private sector. As you know, that report that we did on the banks showed that from the board level to the floor level, there is a skills gap. There is the need to build more awareness, capacity, and even when there's knowledge, there's denial. The concept, I was speaking yesterday at a session, and I did mention that the concept is that since Africa is only contributing 4% to GHG emissions globally, the burden for financing that transition that we need should not be on Africa or on Nigeria. But again, what they are unaware of is the fact that the country, because of its dependence on fossil fuels, faces the transition risk, which is very huge and will impact on the economy very severely. Apart from that, also, cities like Lagos face the physical risk because Lagos, as you know, is one of the 11 cities in the world that is below sea level and that could sink in the next four decades or thereabout. The key actors in the space, like the governor of Lagos, is very much aligned with our agenda. He actually helped us in supporting and launching FC4S Lagos, but you need to speak to other people within the space, not just the governor. There needs to be a buy-in with the commissioners, the ministries, the private sector stakeholders, especially the banking industry. So that is where the work really is. And what we're trying to do at FC4S Lagos is to partner with the Lagos Business School, for example, and create a sustainable finance training module that will be able to market to the bank so that they can train their staff and build a bench strength. You know, if you have a football club, you need to have a constant inflow of footballers so that as you retire the old ones, the young ones can take up the space. In the case of the Nigerian banking sector, we don't even have the regular players in place yet. So we need to build their skills, increase their awareness and capacity so that they can understand, and then they can then be able to lend to green and support the development of green.
Thank you for that, Emmanuel. And I think FC4S will be willing, subject to Jennifer Lamb's permission, to support the type of that development, that type of module, because I would feel obviously everything needs to be localized, but maybe 60-65% of it could be the same for every jurisdiction. And you know, not that FC4S is going to become a trainer, but perhaps you can actually help develop content that can be pushed out to our members. You mentioned something also which is very important in terms of Lagos, where it's positioned geographically, as you said, below sea level. And if you look at the population growth, or obviously currently it's quite a large city, but the potential or estimated population growth over the coming decades, Lagos will be one of these global mega cities, right? And so in terms of a pipeline of projects, so are you saying the challenge right now, because there's an abundance of capital in the world right now, it's actually that skill set around and then understanding where the projects may be. Is that also something that you're looking at in terms of building a pipeline, please, Emmanuel?
Excellent question, Stephen. In fact, one of our priorities here is to help to build that pipeline. As you know, we're working with Ground Up Geneva to be able to get projects together, make them more bankable, and then build that pipeline of projects that can help to deliver our energy and our general climate transition. So one of our core focus areas is to develop pipelines. As someone who runs the secretariat, I receive requests every day from different kinds of persons, whether early stage companies, matured companies, or maturing companies seeking for finance to implement their green projects, green initiatives. Brilliant guys, brilliant ideas. They just need to find a way of making the projects more appealing to the local banks and to the capital markets and the owners of finance. But an important point which we need to bring out is the fact that we need to see an improved inflow of money from the development finance space into Nigeria. Nigeria is a very large country, 212 million people, and is the largest economy in Africa, but it receives, I dare say, the least in terms of development support finance for green projects. This needs to change. For example, FC4S Lagos is being funded by just FMDQ. There's no other institution, whether government or private sector, supporting FC4S Lagos. And this is a single fund that just started 8 years ago and it has its priorities. So when I speak to development partners, they seem not to be interested in funding advocacy or think tanks like us and people who are trying to rally around finance for green. But I think they should be looking at that, because these are the people that are actually carrying out this messaging in terms of promoting a climate transition in Nigeria. So we need to look at inflowing more money for projects and also for the institutions that are committed to this whole climate change transition.
Thank you, Manuel. And again, FC4S is supporting you on that pipeline work with producers, so it's super. Sarah, if I come to you at the heart of Europe, again, we can talk about skills, but Europe, it would be an understatement to say that the EU is now leading on policy and regulatory activities around sustainable finance. It's a tsunami of different regulations that are ongoing or coming towards us, from bonds to obviously the taxonomy to disclosure. There's a lot going on within DG FISMA and the European Commission. What's your perspective on that as a leading European financial centre, and how are you reacting to that? And what are you seeing? How are you seeing your firms react? If I can, please.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, that's actually very important question, because I think there are two sides of the story here. On the one hand, we can tell that our financial centers in Europe, they are in need for a kind of regulation, for clear standards, for transparency. And as you just mentioned, the points like data and conversions. But on the other hand, it also makes it very difficult, because at this point, it's not only about the financial sector, it's also about our real economy. And it's that bridge which is currently very difficult to create. If we think about sustainable finance, just a few years ago, where we were mostly talking about, let's say, green bonds, it developed to a complete value chain we are now considering as sustainable finance. It's on the one hand, the asset management criteria for, let's say, insurances. Where do they invest their capital? On the other hand, it's about lending criteria of banks. How do we define sustainable businesses, and how do we lend our money? But it's also about financing the energetic restoration of, for example, home loan societies, which is a very, very popular financial source in Germany. And it's also about the consultation of the private investors and the clients, and support them into more sustainable decisions. And we all know that. I think that's pretty clear already, and we know that we have to work on it. But we don't know where to start. And I think for that, it's very important that the European Commission started this offensive to have a basis of transparency by the European green, let's say, the European Green Deal, but especially by the first and very important step of the European taxonomy, because the most crucial part we have right now is really getting the data, getting the transparency to start all these offenses.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the Green Deal. The Green Deal has created a framework, an investment envelope, if you will, for the next coming decades. And as you said, and there's a great example, Sarah, the insurance firms themselves, that their primary business, we know what that is, and obviously within that risk management. But again, I'm not a financial person like Jennifer, the other guys in the call, but I also believe the insurance sector is the second largest grouping of asset managers. And as you said, where do they deploy that capital? And I'm talking to a lot of insurance firms, is yes, there are questions about what the EU is doing, but it's beginning to bring that certainty. And in terms of also stranded assets. But you also mentioned something which is really important in terms of a value chain or end to end. And I know Selena was talking about SMEs that are now developing products and services in Kuala Lumpur. Lagos, we have a challenge there, Emmanuel. But maybe, Selena, if I can just jump back to you. So Ireland, earlier on this week, with the support of FC4S, we co-developed Ireland's first national sustainable finance roadmap. And the Minister of Finance launched that, which was super. And he launched it a day before Ireland's annual budget, which is a busy period for him. So the fact that he made time for it highlighted the importance he placed on it. And he's also the president of the Eurogroup. So it's not just Ireland, it's wider within the European context. And there's a lot of work going on within that. There was 18 different actions. If I look at what you're trying to do in Malaysia and some of the different things you talked there, how important are roadmaps to financial centres at this point, because I think what Sarah and Jennifer also hinted at earlier on, I've been at this for a decade, and I joke I had hair when I started, but I did. And now I've got 2 children. I didn't have them when I started this. So all these different changes that are happening. But for a lot of the time, I was going into companies and I was talking to my head of corporate social responsibility. Now it's talk to my chairperson, my chief executive officer, my CFO. It's very, very serious. And I'm seeing that roadmaps, and I know Canada did one when we come to in a moment, but in Kuala Lumpur, are you exploring that? Is this something you think is important, Selena, to really bring the market together, public policy, private and regulatory, towards one target, please?
Stephen, and congratulations on your roadmap. I saw pictures of the launch. In terms of Malaysia, I think if you look at the capital markets in itself, we did launch an SRI, which is a Sustainable Responsible Investment Roadmap, a couple of years ago. And that addressed the whole value chain, but that was very specific for the capital market. And I think because the regulator had the foresight, we started looking at regulations in sustainable finance as early as 2014. And we started off in the fixed income space, and we've slowly moved, and then we started playing a bigger role in the equity side and public equity side. And now we're looking at asset management, and now, of course, private markets and digital. On the banking side, a couple of years ago, there was the launch of the joint committee between both the regulators. We have the banking regulator and we have the capital markets regulator, and they've jointly set up a joint committee on climate change, and they're developing a taxonomy for the financial sector in collaboration with the financial sector players. So in a sense, we do have a roadmap for the capital markets, the banking, and we're looking at taxonomy. But if you're talking about a holistic roadmap, in my opinion, I think it helps. It helps give sort of direction to get all the players moving in the same pace. Because like you said, like you mentioned something just now, Stephen, which it totally resonates with me, is there are just too many initiatives. Even like in a country like Malaysia, we have so many different, I mean, sustainable finance has become so important and everyone's addressing it, but it's, you know, it's confusing for the corporates, you know. Do I look at GRI? Do I look at TCFD? Do I look at prime oil disclosures? What do I look at? So there's so many different ways of addressing sustainable finance. And I think a roadmap, sort of a holistic national roadmap, does put everything together and puts everyone on the same page, I think, in my opinion.
Great, thank you, Selena. Jennifer, I remember a few years ago, EY did an excellent piece of work, actually, a document around Canada. So I know, again, go back to the skills agenda, I'm talking to you that there is a strategy there. But Jennifer, you know, if I can maybe go above Canada and now look at North America, recognizing that Toronto is the second largest financial services center in North America and hugely successful, and only a short flight away to the border to the US, which I'm unsure if you're allowed into now during this period. I know I'm not allowed in yet, but yeah, and I'm not even a neighbor. But I suppose my question here is, how important is it over the last 10 months, the Biden administration's steps, you know, stepping back at the Paris Agreement? But there seems to be a heck of a lot going on around climate finance. I saw the Securities Exchange Commission focus on greenwashing recently. There's talk they're going to focus on the TCFD. So, you know, within that North American environment with a lot of your firms work in, how important are those signals and the actions coming out of America, please, Jennifer?
I think it's very important. You know, obviously we have a very large neighbor to the south, and when we were operating sort of on different pages, I'll call it, for quite some time, that was difficult. And I think now that we've got better alignment on this particular issue, I think that's really important for North America. And the reality is that, you know, if you think about business in Canada and in the US, I mean, we are huge trading partners, right? We're very integrated from that perspective in terms of our economies. So having that alignment is very, very important. You know, most of our big financial institutions, they're all in the US. Our big insurers, they're in the US. Our pension funds, massive investors in the US. So it's really important, Stephen, to see that alignment. And I think we'll be able to get much better momentum, obviously, as we see them move forward with their plans. So, you know, I think we've always been good partners with the US, and I think Canada and the US will continue to do that on this particular issue as well.
And Jennifer, I'm sitting here in a makeshift studio. It's far more than makeshift, it's incredibly professional, but here in Ireland, in the headquarters of Ireland's largest bank, AIB, still 74% owned by the state of Ireland, but there's significant Canadian pension money actually in this institution, which is fantastic, out of Toronto, as you mentioned. And you also mentioned earlier on when you were making your introductions, and this is why I came back, because you didn't speak to Toronto, you spoke with your global hat on about FCFRES and WAIFC, right? Which is fantastic. But you said it's important from a Canadian perspective that it's not just Canada, but it's also global on the sustainable finance agenda. So if I may just, again, I know focus on North America, I focus with Canada, North America, but let's take it globally. The work that you're seeing FCFRES involved in, for example, in G20, and the fact that the G20 under the Italian presidency have actually re-established the working group, and it was a study group, now they've put it up to a sustainable finance working group. Again, just with your global hat on, how important is that, again, just kind of the signal that's sending out to the marketplace? Because it does go back to one of the challenges I mentioned earlier on. There's so much going on a policy and regulatory level. The G20 is now trying to converge as much as they can. What's your perspective on that, please, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think that's really important. We do need that signal that this is, if you look at, you know, the world's leaders and the world's leaders of the economy, of their economies, that they're focused on this, that this is a key priority as they think about, you know, what are the, you know, what are the top 3-5 things everyone is thinking about. I do think climate, I do think sustainable economic development is now in that category. So I think, to your point, Stephen, it's important that that has been signaled appropriately. Now it's time for action, though, and I think, you know, Zara was touching on this before too. It's how do we align sort of what happens from a policy perspective, from a regulatory perspective, with the private sector, because they're moving in every country at different paces, right? In some countries like the EU, you've got policy leading. In countries, in other countries, and I would put Canada in this category to a certain degree, it's the private sector that is actually leading and pushing this forward. So I think that alignment at the leadership level, from a finance perspective, political perspective, is really important. And I think for us to be moving together, as opposed to, you know, there's good things happening all over the world, right? And countries are trying to move in the right directions, but as much as we can have convergence around standards and disclosure and what is, you know, what are the most efficient ways to grow these markets and to grow these activities within the financial services sector is really, really important right now.
I completely agree, Jennifer, and we're seeing the work of the IFRS on standards, which is really important, and maybe establishment of an international foundation on that space. And I also like the way you mentioned, you know, Canada, the private sector. The same is true in Australia, right? So we literally do have the Australian government, the heads in the sand, if I can say that. Well, I've said it, so it's out there. But you're seeing it's the private sector in Australia that actually is driving this forward, the Australian Sustainable Finance Initiative, which is now setting up the Australian Sustainable Finance Institute. And it's interesting, it's not so much the engagement at the federal level, but at the state level, the Australian private sector, it's resonating completely. And so that's also interesting to see. And you know, I'm not saying it's apples for apples, but the Australian economy as well is very, you know, focused on extraction, you know, coal, oil and gas. So also interesting to see that the private sector is leading on that. I think the key statement you just made there is, though, time for action. And so perhaps I can now pivot on to, in the time that we have left, time for action as we look at COP26 and financial centres, and what actually financial centres are doing now and what we hope to see financial centres do after. So Emmanuel, I want to pivot to you, please, sir. As you build towards COP, what do you think financial centres are going to bring to COP in terms of achievements so far? And I know we can only speak to Lagos, but what do you think Lagos can bring? And then what do you hope will happen after COP and the role that Lagos as a financial centre could play in that, please?
It's a very interesting question. I'll speak to what Lagos expects and what I think African countries would like to see as one of the key outcomes for COP. I think one of the agreements among international financial centers and those who are mobilizing finance for green and sustainability is the fact that the agreements made by the developed countries in 2015 that they are going to, for example, be supporting emerging markets like Nigeria and other countries with about $100 billion every year should now be implemented as has been promised. I don't think we've been able to achieve $100 billion altogether in the intervening period between 2015 and now when the Paris Agreement was signed. But I think there needs to be that, the inflow of finance that we're looking at from the development, from the developed countries. But again, internally as financial centers, we'll work within ourselves to use local resources to also drive the climate agenda. So, for example, Lagos has supported the issuance of both sovereign and corporate debt instruments, and recently has encouraged Lagos State to be the first subnational state to issue a green bond. So there's a program of $100 billion, and $25 billion will be the first issuance. And FMDQ, which is the Secretariat for FC4S Lagos, is in the one driving the states towards that issuance. We hope to also get other states to come on board. So we're mobilizing local finance, but at the same time looking to have foreign finance inflows also come in so that we can have that whole pool of finance. That's the kind of thing we want to bring to COP, to tell other countries that we are doing our best to mobilize finance for green and sustainable development goal-focused projects. But also the most important part, I think, is the fact that there's a need for increased capacity building and awareness. The key actors in this space must be upskilled. So before the session started, I think we're having a conversation with the other panelists, and we mentioned the need for skills upgrade, the need for training, capacity building. And I'm glad that you have said that FC4S will be supporting Lagos in its bid to increase the knowledge level of those who are supporting sustainable finance in the financial sector. We want that bespoke module to be for financial sector actors, and including insurance and banks, who are the key actors in the space of mobilizing investments and finance for sustainable finance-related projects and green. So those are the kind of things we want to see emphasized at COP: knowledge, capacity building, and access to finance for developing countries like Nigeria, so that we can be able to address this climate and energy transition that we desire.
Thank you, Manuel. And just before I come to my next panel member, if you do want to ask any questions, please type it in. I will see it, and I'll come to you after in a few moments. Sarah, just in terms of that question around COP and time for action, as Jennifer put it so well, Stuttgart, heart of Europe. We've talked about what's happening in Europe. How well positioned is Stuttgart as a major financial center, in terms of going to COP, but also after, in trying to realize the ambitions that will fall out of COP from a financing perspective, please?
Well, as I just mentioned before, that as a financial center, we started to prioritize our topics and started the sustainable finance developments only 1.5 years ago. And we could already see that before there have been some actions taken by the individual institutions. It was definitely not enough, even though we've been running with this topic for so many years already. But maybe at this point, I can also mention the report we did with the WAIFC, where it was last December, where we jointly with the Financial Center of Abu Dhabi did evaluate the current trajectories, their lessons and learnings, as well as their success stories within their financial centers. And we saw that even there, every financial did something, but there was no clear objective on where to go, in which direction to go. So we hope that, especially now after this COP26 meeting, we will have more ambitions, we will have more clear guidelines. But how ready are we? I think, especially due to the pandemic, we all made a huge progress on this topic, because many of our countries started to implement the SDGs in their recovery plans, which was a very, very big leverage. It had a leverage effect on our developments within that last 2 years. So I think we are already on a very good point, but we do need a little bit more of a guideline to also help our economy, because I mean, at the end of it, the financial sector's job is to provide the financial services value chain, because we will have to provide the services for our economy, right? And to provide these, we need a little bit more of transparency. We need a little bit more of a sustainable action taken. And if we can provide this, I think we will be in a very good way. And for the COP26, I hope that there will be a little bit more of an offensive and a little bit more of a demand for more ambitions, which we can take with us and implement in our financial centers.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And Jennifer, that's a really good point Sarah made earlier on there, is that we're actually, like, again, I joke, but I have been at this for a decade, and it's really got serious in the last few years, and I'm glad I stuck with it. But it has only really got serious in the last few years, and there is a lot going on, but we're only really now getting into the substance and the weeds, and we mentioned capacity building. So is it fair to say, I think the way Sarah framed it, we're all kind of waiting to see what falls out of COP, because then that's going to give us the roadmap. Is that a fair comment, Jennifer, or am I mistaken that?
I do think there's a feeling that everybody wants this to be a catalyst for real action. You know, I certainly would agree with that. I definitely agree with Sarah that, you know, we need that coordination. We need to see some better coordination internationally between the private and public sector coming out of this. So, you know, I do think that those are important things people are expecting. I would also say that I think one of the important dialogues that's going to take place at COP26 is around transition. You know, how do we attack those really tough industries and where we really need to see emissions reductions? And, you know, we can't just close them down tomorrow. We've got to see progress there. So how do we tackle those really tough issues that require difficult, complex solutions? They're not the easy ones, you know, it's not like renewable energy initiatives or things like that. It's the messy stuff. So I think we're going to have to start talking about that at not only COP26, but thereafter. What is our plan? Because we have to start thinking about our economies holistically in each country and globally. So, you know, yes, hopefully this is that catalyst, because we've made all kinds of big announcements in different countries. And in the study that was done by WAIFC, they mentioned many of them, but people want results now. We're going to see very difficult questions asked going forward. It's great we've made great announcements. What are the results? Where is the progress? What is the impact? Those are going to be questions, the tough questions.
May I just jump in on that point for a second? Because Jennifer just mentioned a really good point with the economy. And here in Stuttgart, we are not known for the very, very big financial sector. We are known for a strong economy, right? We have very world-leading companies sitting here. We have a huge automotive section. And we can really clearly see that our economy, which is based on SMEs, is a little bit behind. And this is not only because of problems with the financial sector not providing the liquidity or not the transparency or the support. It's also because we have problems on the one hand that the ESG statistics you can find online as private investors, for example, they always reflect companies that are big enough to pay rating agencies to get on these statistics or have some cooperative contracts so that they kind of make it on these lists. But on the other hand, because we were talking so much about the skills, we also need way more skills to really tackle that climate change topic from experts, from engineers, and people who can really make that transformation happen.
And that's a great point. And actually, Salina, I'm going to come to you last, if I may, because Jennifer mentioned transition, and Sarah has made an excellent point. Here in Ireland, a recent poll of SMEs and climate 70% say, well, this is an issue within 5 years. Not today, not in the next 12 months. You know, we've got Brexit, which is another thing here in Ireland, obviously, but it's a thing in 5 years. And you're kind of sitting there going, no, it's happening now. So in an economy like Kuala Lumpur, and back to Jennifer's point about transition, as we build towards COP, what are your hopes, please, Salina?
Stephen, I think 2 points. I think addressing what Jennifer said about transition. I mean, Malaysia, in terms of our carbon footprint globally, in terms of, we're just a rounding up error. So in terms of our contribution, we're rounding up error, but our real economy, just like Zara mentioned, makes up economic sectors that are the largest emitters. So I think for us, we had, from a regulator point of view, and both the regulators have taken this very seriously, how do we help our economy transition? And given the fact that the financial sector is a driver, it's the financial sector that can change or create a momentum in this space. I think that's where the whole financial sector is shifting its attention to. And we're looking at transition for the next 24 to 36 months. But the other question that you had posed earlier, Stephen, was what could Malaysia bring to COP26? And as you know, we've also sort of committed to net zero. The thing is how we address and how we have leveraged on our existing leadership is we've used Islamic finance to fund sustainable projects. People talk about green bonds and sustainable bonds, but we started the first framework on the green sukuk. And we have the most number of green or sustainable sukuks in this space. So what we've done as a country is we've leveraged on our existing leadership on Islamic finance, and we've shown how Islamic finance can be used to sort of fund sustainable projects. And going forward, what we're doing is we're working with other jurisdictions who have Islamic finance essence or who have track record in that. And we're sort of engaging with them on how to create awareness on how to use Islamic finance to fund sustainability. Or two is how do we exchange best practices to enable that transition to become a more sustainable economy.
And I think, Jennifer, from an FC4S perspective, that would be something for FC4S actually to, Salina, if possible, to get involved in and capturing that best practice. I know next year Indonesia is hosting G20 presidency, and therefore they'll be over the Sustainable Finance Working Group, and that's perhaps something we should follow up with. I'm just conscious of time, and typical Irish, I'm going to go on a little bit longer, but Jochen, I want to come back to you because you've been sitting there looking incredibly handsome in the corner of my eye for the last hour. If there's any question what you've heard here today, what would that be, please, if you want to pose that?
Thanks, Stephen. In my opinion, countries like Malaysia and also Nigeria, so developing countries, seem to be a little bit stuck between a stone and a hard place. On one hand, they need growth, they need high growth. Rightfully, the population expect increasing GDP per capita. They have to manage the transition. They cannot afford a dip due to the transition. They have to spend on infrastructure in general, even beyond sustainable finance. They need to prepare for natural disasters, which inevitably will come sooner or later, and need to have reserves for this, and seem to lack a little bit or don't get the international support fast enough. My question to Salina and Emmanuel is that too negative, too pessimistic, or is that right?
If I could just...
Oh, sorry, Salina, please.
Yeah. So thank you. That's a great question. I think for us, if we were looking for support, I think it would be in the areas of best practices and building up the skill set. I think that is an area that we need to fast track. We don't have time to let it organically grow. So that is the kind of areas we're collaborating with other developed countries. In fact, the UK government supported MSFI last year and brought the best practices from UK, and they ran capacity development programs in that space. So fundamentally, skill sets is the most important area that we're trying to address at the moment. And that's where developed countries could sort of work with us on that sense.
Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Jochen. I think that's a very important point. from our point of view, is a bit it's a bit dampening, and it creates some level of pessimism, especially when you're trying to convince the actors in the financial space, the banking sector. And one of the things I think will help, really, as I mentioned earlier on, is to have better inflows, increased inflows of foreign funding into green projects in Nigeria. That way, you are creating a blended finance that can help to stimulate and accelerate the pace of transition. That's because Nigeria, even though we have a rich economy, we are too rich to be poor and too poor to be rich. There's no denying that. A lot of people live below $2, $3 a day. And so the banking sector are more skewed towards lending to fossil fuel related projects because the economy as a whole is dependent on hydrocarbons. 80% of government revenues come from hydrocarbons. And you're going to ask us to transit to clean energy, to cleaner resources. It means you're going to tank the economy. So you have to find a way to inflow money, then the banking sector can join you. I'm having a hard time selling this. Stephen is aware of the project we did for between last year, around February, March, up to June this year. So if we can have those inflows coming in, then we'll be able to have local finance joining together with these foreign inflows to help to drive this project. I have a whole portfolio of projects ready to go. Access to finance is the key thing, and the unwillingness of the banking sector to support because, one, they don't understand. Two, even those who understand are in denial. And so we need, once they see that inflow, that will shape or reshape their minds and create that readiness to invest in green, promote green, sponsor green. So finance is one, then capacity building and creating awareness is a key area. Some of the things we're also doing as a center is also to support, the country align its priorities with green. So, for example, in the area of WASH, FC4S Lagos will be doing a major event on WASH November 23rd, water sanitation and hygiene, and we'll be promoting local entrepreneurship in this space to showcase products that can be used to address the issue, because Nigeria has the unenviable reputation as being the worst country in the world for open defecation. But we're doing it from a private sector perspective. The entire funding for that project is coming from FMDQ and one other private sector firm that has chosen to support us. What about foreign inflows coming in to support this? That will just galvanize the sector. It will change the whole narrative, and you will see the pace of development will be faster and quicker. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel, and great question, Jochen. I'm just conscious we've gone slightly over time, so I'm not going to try and recap, because I actually think Jochen's question was a great recap, actually, of kind of the challenges he saw them in that question. So I suppose from my perspective, there's a lot of takeaways, but the big one is time for action, but also looking to COP as a catalyst or as a signal. And I would argue, and Jennifer, under your leadership and that of Lamia and our steering committee of both Selina and Emmanuel are members of, along with Jennifer, FC4S is now very well positioned at a staff of 15 around the world, very well positioned to play a role after COP, and a big focus on skills, data, equal and product development. We're involved at a policy level, as we know. We don't want to be just another initiative. We want to be, very strategic, and now looking at the enabling opportunities that digital brings. And I'm delighted we're doing the work in Toronto on the skills. Nigeria, the piece that we did with the banks, and we continue to support Emmanuel, and then Selina, the assistance with the assessment program. But also we want to do that roadmap. Let's get there on that roadmap. We're all working towards it. So, Jochen, I've thoroughly enjoyed today. I think we should do more. I'm thinking of SMEs. I'm looking at fintech, but we don't want to do events for the sake of them. They have to be very strategic, and the insights that our members are brought here today was fantastic. Jennifer, can I maybe just turn to you to close out, please?
Thank you, Stephen. I think you summarized really well, and I think it's been a great discussion. Lots of good topics here. I think the theme of action is an important one. And I think organizations like FC4S and World Association of International Financial Centres can be very important in catalyzing action. And I think our collaboration and continued work together is very important going forward. So I look forward to more discussions and more successful initiatives together.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jochen. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Selina. And thank you to the team for organizing today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned a lot. And have a great day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.